Miscellaneous. The following is just random points I either forgot to add to, or later thought up for previous segments and chapters. They will be later fitted in properly for the final product. Anyhow. Climate change. It seems that climate change does exist. What's causing it and to what degree man has a part could be up for debate in some circles. However, the Kremlin and sympathizers spread disinformation not only to those who are inclined to disbelieve climate change, but to those who are hyper-aware of it as well. People living in the backwoods in any Midwest town are being told via different means that climate change is a myth. At the same time and by the same organization running the show, people in metropolises are being told the wrong way to solve climate change. Why? So that these two groups hate each other. Why? Chaos in the Western world. In reality, we have very little control in mitigating climate change. Especially because our attention has been on creating green vehicles that aren't green at all. It's more than just cars and energy production, however. It seems every green initiative somehow contributes to climate change, but in a less obvious way. It's all down to the disinformation. Living a modern life in any way takes up carbon footprints. Hopefully carbon capture technology will develop faster, then we can burn all the energy we need. There's a revision on wind turbines I will need to add in later. Apparently, there are new super tall wind turbines that can produce energy more reliably and in greater amounts. One thing is, what kind of lubricant will be used to keep the turbines spinning, I wonder. Gender relations. With the rise of online matchmaking, I can see a way of cyber warfare with long-term effects playing out. I suspect foreign adversaries are hacking online dating apps, hindering the ability for users to get dates. Ugh, this guy is a wacko. Why would anyone care about that? If men and women fail to couple, they will not have children at any great number. When we say children are the future, it isn't just lyrics to a song, it's reality. If we fail to have kids, there is no future workforce, no future army, no future anything. Foreign adversaries know this, and try at great length to hinder the coupling of young adults in enemy countries. Why no one is to care about rich people who aren't white and old. The espionage infiltrating the fringes of the left are having these lefties believing that rich white men are the worst and don't contribute to society somehow. I've already explained how that's silly and short-sighted, but remember the far left is high on shrooms, weed, and acid, or pharmaceuticals, prescriptive or otherwise. This limits brain capacity. It's easy to make anyone believe the reason their failures is someone else's fault. Deep down in their sober mind they know that isn't true, however they're rarely ever completely sober. In that state of being, it's easy to spread disinformation. Especially if it doesn't make a lot of sense. Rich people are bad, however there are people who don't count. All wealthy sports athletes don't count, all wealthy actors don't count. The same goes for musicians. Rarely or never do we hear of the ill-begotten gains of famous pop stars. Why? Perhaps it's by design. The doped-up leftists believe the nonsense spread to them on social media and in the real world by planted agents and useful idiots. Then, the far right is made aware of the nonsense to rile them up. Again, it's to cause chaos in the Western world. Health insurance, and who has it? A small bone to pick. Every Canadian has free health insurance. Your health insurance pays your hospital and family doctor visits. Certain businesses offer prescription benefits to their employees. Why are we being made to feel bad about the suggested level of hospital donations in Scarborough? Why do Canadian hospitals need donations? Our taxes should be paying for everything. These ads suggesting that somehow everyone in the GTA is neglecting Scarborough hospitals is troubling. It's not troubling because somehow Scarborough is being ignored. It's troubling because somehow the Scarborough tax dollars aren't doing enough. That's what anyone should conclude. Why are Scarborough tax dollars not doing enough? Is there corruption? Or are the advertisements spread across Toronto lying? Perhaps someone should look into that. Anyhow. In the USA, citizens gain health insurance directly with insurance companies that they pay for monthly. As well, US citizens gain health insurance from employment. Most citizens in the US have health insurance paid for by their employer. From part-time workers to full-time workers. There is a statistic out there in which people express much sadness. Around 30 million Americans do not have health insurance. Terrible. Out of 330 million people, somehow, 30 million people do not have health insurance. I wonder who these people are. Although they seem to deeply care, the far left and far right will never look to figure this out. Perhaps we can figure this out right now. At the current moment there are around 6 million unemployed people in the United States. If most people get their insurance from employment, we could say 6 out of the 30 million who don't have health insurance are unemployed. It's not to say that they will never have health insurance. Just like it isn't to say they'll never get a job. The unemployed population isn't the same people year after year. It's ridiculous to think that. It costs money to be alive. You need to work to make money. Therefore, you will get a job or be a beggar on the streets. So, now we have to account for 24 million people without health insurance. Perhaps an obvious population, which is truly sad, no matter how many people find themselves in that state, is the homeless. In the US there are around 600,000 homeless people. It isn't a stretch to say they probably can't afford health insurance if they can't afford a home. That leaves us with more or less 23.4 million people in the US who don't have health insurance. If I was paid $200,000 or more a year, I'm not sure I would see a need in either purchasing my own health insurance or getting it from my employer. Funny enough, the remainder in the uninsured population, more or less, fits the population who make more than $200,000 a year. Bernie Sanders or AOC will never say that out loud, even if they took the 10 minutes it took me to look this information up. Chapter 9, The World is the Wild Wild West. Part 1, Consequences, What is World Order? When you were a kid, were you able to do anything you wanted? If so, you were probably a bully to your peers' parents and teachers. This seems far-fetched. A more realistic picture is that if you were a bully, you were probably the biggest of your class or of your siblings. However, your parents were always bigger than you. You weren't going to bully them for at least another 20 years. There always is a hierarchy. The strong will beat down on the weak. It doesn't always happen, of course. Just because one is physically or mentally strong, doesn't mean they beat down on any weak passerby. However, their strength allows them the ability to do so. Parents, teachers, and other caregivers hold this power and responsibility over children. In contrast, if the adults are not present, let's say the playground, after school hours, kids have no higher authority. It is left to them to determine their actions. Perhaps if mischief, such as a fight or theft occurs, authority figures later can be made aware, but until that moment the children are their own boss. There are only brief moments that kids aren't supervised. As they get older, most children are taught it isn't right to bully. As well, they are taught the consequences of such actions. That fear keeps them from perhaps acting against bullying behavior. It isn't just the realm of bullying where regulation is put. It's in homework, eat your vegetables, don't steal, come home before dark, clean your room, etc. There are countless things children have managed and monitored by their parents. As we get older, most of this monitoring is done by us. We're not worried we'll be grounded if we don't eat our vegetables. We're worried our waist size will grow too large. However, even the fear of gaining too much weight isn't because we're scared of being reprimanded by our superiors. In a lot of cases we have no superiors, we have peers. Of course, stealing and other crimes is monitored by authority figures we now have to answer to. Not to mention, productivity at work is monitored. As adults we are subject to new monitors regulating our behavior, however our authority figures are more reactive. Speaking for the Western world, they're not actively authoritatively demanding our general course. We have more autonomy as adults. As children we were forced to do the things that would benefit us, with short-term and long-term effects. As adults, we can choose to say no or yes to many more things. Of course, there are consequences, but those are our choices to make. So far I've been talking about more mundane things, but what about serious crime? In the adult world, even the regulators who are supposed to enforce the law, sometimes break them. Then they are subject to the same punishment as you or I would be, under the same circumstances. What I'm saying is, in the adult world we are all accountable to each other. Sure, there are figures of authority. However, they only remain in those positions as long as they do a satisfactory job. Let me get a bit more crime specific. Let's talk murder. If I were a letter carrier and I murdered a colleague of mine, that's not just a surefire way of losing my job, I'll be going to prison for the rest of my life. If I get caught. When I say caught, of course I could mean found out to be the murderer, but I could also mean physically caught and put in custody. Let's say that's what happened and a manhunt ensues. However, I've read the tea leaves and the writing on the wall, so I left the country long in advance. Depending on where I go, I may never be caught. Outside my country, domestic law enforcement loses its jurisdiction. I'm scot-free. How about if I killed 1 million people, however? You may be thinking, that's a pretty crafty letter carrier. Or perhaps you're not surprised. Perhaps your letter carrier is shifty like that. Anyhow, for my next example, I'm suggesting I was the head of state or a warlord. I control the domestic army and issue a decree to kill 1 million of the citizens of my country in a wacko whim of something, not sure what. The international community, or parts of it, would probably condemn my actions. But for a long time, I would face no consequences, maybe even never. Why is that? Well, it depends. It depends how powerful my army is and who my friends are. As well, it depends on if I invade my neighbor. Alrighty, 1 million of my citizens are killed for some political reason, now I want to invade my neighbor. They have nice farmland and oil-rich deposits. I'd like to be part of the would-be empire I preside over. The international community huffs and haws. They sanction my nation, but they do not militarily aid the nation under attack. It takes a year, but I take the lands I wanted. That costs another 500k more souls. However, I still haven't felt any concrete consequences. The international community speak against my actions, suggesting they break international law, but other than condemnation, no concrete action is taken to reprimand me. Once I've taken swaths of my neighbor's land, I make clear my further goals. I want to push on in the invasion until a mountain chain on the other side of the country. That will be a good defensive position for my country to hold off a potential coalition. In another year, I do just that after killing another 2 million people. My neighbor no longer exists, they have been swallowed by my powerful army. Again, no other nation, other than the one I annexed, fought to keep me from pursuing my imperial dreams. Perhaps given time other nations would come to the aid of the fallen nation. However, every nation has their own citizens to think of and care for. Moreover, who is to say the citizens of the would-be helpful nations wouldn't revolt at the idea of their men and women at arms dying for another country under attack? It's very tricky. Before I get into coalitions, I want to talk about why and how it was possible I was able to annex my neighbor in the first place. The most obvious answer is, because they were weak, and my nation was exceedingly strong. What makes nations weak or strong? You could say a large army makes a country strong. What does it take to have a larger army? People to fight for starters, but of course it's more than that. If my army is 5 million strong, each soldier must have at least a uniform to wear as well as enough combat gear to be a proper functioning soldier. From minor first aid equipment to standard firearms. To support an army of soldiers, there needs also to be an army of industry workers producing all things the military needs. That takes up people resources. In short, a large population can yield a large army. It just so happens that my neighbor had a population 10 times smaller than that of my country. They had no chance. How does any of this relate to the chapter's title? Let me explain. The international community has issued an arrest warrant for me and other high officials under my control. If I'm caught, I will be tried. The only thing is, what is international law to me if I don't comply or care of its relevance? The issuers of such a warrant have to come and get me, or if I dim-wittingly find myself in a country that abides by these international laws, I'll be arrested that way. Sounds far-fetched to me. Until the opposing forces of the world attempt to enforce their warrant, it's meaningless. Why? There is no higher power in the world other than heads of state. Even if there was, it would have to be an enforcing power. There would have to be real consequences for infringing on any laws. No one would willingly agree to that. What I'm trying to say is, it's tricky. At a nation-to-nation level, it's really dog-eat-dog. It's raw competition. If I want to take something, I can just do it. You have to prove you can stop me. If you can't, I'll take anything I want. Sure, I'm a terrible human being for annexing my neighbor. But I'm using their land to make my people's life better off. Not to mention the lives of the people living in the lands I annexed. They will be considered my people as well. Perhaps if I were to agree to trade commodities, instead of forcefully take the resources, it would have benefited both of us. But if I had the power to enforce benefits in favor of my nation, I would use that power, and so would probably my neighbor. Next time, I'll talk about the centuries of coalition wars in Europe.